Ashton Black is with us for the next 4 episodes. She's going to be talking with us about our sexual health and development. She's a sexual health educator who's dedicated to helping people of all ages learn about their reproductive health, really the importance of consent and all the nuances that come with that, and the many facets of relationships. She values fostering curiosity and inclusion. And it's really important for her that we talk about how to reduce shame in this conversation. Ashton has a particular interest in teaching to and learning with parents and families, especially those with diverse cultural backgrounds and abilities. So Ashton and I get along really well because of all of this. And so I have asked if she would pour out her wisdom on this hot topic in the next 4 episodes to help us better understand how to have these conversations with our kids. Welcome, Ashton.
Hi. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good today. I don't know. Don't ask me that question. I'm not ready. Are you ready? No.
Are you ready to talk about sex?
I am not.
No one ever is.
Which is exactly why we're doing this, because parents don't ever feel really ready to talk about it because it's ongoing and it pops up and it feels very unpredictable sometimes. And each of our kids are different. And what we were raised with was different. So I just feel like there's no one template for everybody, but I feel like that is why it feels so scary. And that is also why we need to just keep talking about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. All of our experiences are so unique, and it's undoubtedly at some point our children will come to us, usually at the most, awkward moment or the most impromptu time to have this conversation. You're caught so off guard and just like, what do we do? What do we do? And how do we say it? Yeah. Is often what I hear from families. Yeah. How do I have this conversation? How do I do it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is episode 1 of the how. We're going to cover the how today, or try to, and see where that goes. And when we were planning for this and you were talking through, I was like, oh, like a sponge soaking in, like, oh, these are all the hows that everybody's so hungry for. So I want to put it in all caps. Like, how is the HOW big letters? Because it's so layered.
Oh, yeah.
Layered. So take us through, just when I ask you that question, how do you talk to your kids about sex? What's where do you go in your head as a sexual health educator?
Goodness.
Where do you even begin?
Yeah, it makes me think of the joke of, I hear this from parents all the time where they're like, do I talk about it in the car? Do I talk about it in the car or in a place where we're both looking forward and straight ahead and the doors are locked and we'll just make it happen and then it's going to be okay? And there's some humor to it, of course, because sometimes that's a great place to have that conversation. But really, I think it's just speaking to the space. So the first thing I always want to remind families when they're having these kinds of conversations, and because they can feel tricky, making sure that the space is really safe will really set the tone. And like you said, it's ongoing. So just thinking about where we are having these conversations so that if they do need to go a little bit more into detail, you're going to be able to do that. So perhaps like a grocery store, when they ask you that impromptu question, is not going to be the time to try and tackle it. So the other thing I hear a lot is just what do I tell them? So there is the safe space, but there's the what. And I think why this becomes so tricky, Karen, is because all of our own experiences come back to us. And sometimes those were positive. Sometimes they may not have been. Perhaps we didn't have comprehensive sexual health education in school. Perhaps we lived in a household where these conversations weren't common and it just wasn't something that it was talked about. And so from our own experiences, I think we can reflect and say, what went well? What did I like? What made me feel good and safe? And what would I like for my child? What experiences, or how can I deliver this information in a way that will support our family values? So I never want families to get super hung up right away on what specifically it is. There are so many
Okay.
great resources out there. It's more about setting the stage for having those open-ended conversations, being able to be curious with your child, and yeah, like I said, making it a safe space so that they know that these conversations are ongoing and we can come back to them, and they do evolve, and our information and our understanding of this is going to grow just as they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something I also think about is the minimal education many of us in my generation at least received. It was like the bare minimum, the mechanics, the book slipped under the pillow, the whatever, the
The
side
birds and
conversation
the
that I'm
bees.
sure you'll learn about it in grade 4 in school, so I don't have to talk about it at home. And I'll wait
Yeah.
until you're really lost and confused and come to me out of desperation for asking
Yeah.
questions. Then I'll kind of give you like the little bit I know. And if that's who we are as parents, in a world where I think just information is so much more readily available to kids, they access
Mm-hmm.
it, and not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily in the places we want them to access it, maybe not reliable information, not, but to them, if they're seeking, they have a different place to look for it than we did.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's at their fingertips. So I think about that juxtaposition of us parents with very little knowledge or feeling like we know very little, even if we've been in sexually active relationships for a long time. That is a very personal experience as compared to like, I can tell you the world of sexual health. I cannot, like, because it wasn't given to me and it felt unnecessary to really learn all of that. So now I see my kids as like, what do you already know? Where did you find that? Like, it's a platform that feels very different. This is not a blank slate they often come with.
But what you did, Karen, there, that is exactly it. What do you already know? So sometimes these questions come, of course, we want to give kids developmentally appropriate information.
Yeah.
So it is going to vary depending on how old they are for sure, and what we end up introducing them to. But the curiosity is important because what do you already know, and where's this question coming from? There's always
Mm.
this lovely, it's so cute. It makes me laugh every time where, like little Avery comes to you and says like, where am I from? And you think, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to talk about conception or reproduction or pregnancy
Yep.
or like, what do I do? You're there and you're in the moment, but without asking some clarifying questions or trying to
Yeah.
understand what is the intention behind that. Where's my curiosity? Like, why, Avery, would you like to know that? You may go down that
Mm.
line of trying to explain reproduction and where babies are from just to find out that he says, someone in class is from Saskatchewan, and I was curious about that, and you're like, whoa, whoops.
Oops.
And that on the most innocent of questions, of course. But if
Yeah.
you were to take an example that's maybe a little bit more loaded, around gender identity or your sexuality preferences or something that they see on TV or masturbation or something like that,
Yeah.
you can see really quickly that you don't want to have to go down that rabbit hole for yourself. You want to get really clear on what it is that they're trying to ask you. So if you don't know, you can say, let's learn that together. But
Mm.
that would be a huge tip that I tell people. Ask them, be curious. What do you already
Yeah.
know? What do you already know
Okay.
about that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I then what readiness, if we're entering that space with our kids, how ready do we feel to hear their answer?
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm feeling myself I'm stealing
Yeah.
myself already. Like get ready because I
Yes.
haven't asked yet. If I ask, what are they going to say? What am I going to
Yep.
have to, and how am I going to be reacting to that? Right?
Yeah. And such a great point, Karen, because it's asking ourselves, why are we reacting this way?
Yeah.
Why, what is it that is making me nervous about what I might potentially hear?
Mm.
And really reflecting on, am I modeling those messages? And do I think that I'm finding those small opportunities to talk about our family values so that when I do ask these questions, I know they have, a basis from, I don't want to use the word expectation, but to have an idea of, um, yeah, to,
Like the purpose or the why or the what it's
Well,
founded on.
yeah, it's the
Yeah.
expectations perhaps of, knowing what their parents are going to be comfortable with. So,
Yeah.
when we want to ask, sensitive conversations or very sensitive questions or topics, they do need to know that it is going to be okay to answer you honestly.
Yeah.
As difficult as it might be for us to hear it, by being able to hear that is how we are going to be able to have conversation about our family's values, and where we get that information, how we feel about that information. Um, there is a really interesting, it's not like a statistic, it's a really interesting saying that we do tell a lot of parents is parents still are the most trusted resource for sexual health information
Hmm.
from their child. Of course, in their formative years and while they're young and as they're growing and they're curious, but even as they enter those like early teen years and the times where they want to start leaning into their friends and they want to see what other people know and to be accepted, and they're really learning and going through that developmental stage of identity, there is still so much to be said that they would like to be able to ask that from a trusted,
Mm.
caring adult. So we
Yeah.
still have that opportunity
Hmm.
to be there, to be that person, and to answer those questions honestly, but only if we are answering them honestly.
Yeah, and if we've set the stage for the comfort, right?
Yeah.
That we are the safe place. So the desire is one thing for a teen to go, I wish I had a parent I could XYZ with, but that is such a different narrative than I have a parent that it's kind of like tried, tested, and true. Like I've tested the water on this with other softer things, right? And
Yes.
they've shown me their response does not have to be perfect. Um, and without the shock, maybe even, but just that you have the ability to keep going and go,
Hmm.
okay, I had a reaction there because, or right, that you don't go, ugh, and then that's it, right? Because
Yes.
that then sends the message, this isn't
Yes.
safe. But if I
Yeah.
go, oh, and I go, okay, hang on, I know I'm reacting and let's keep talking about it, right? Then that shows, okay, we can walk it through. It will be
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And affirming, that's a really great question.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think I'm going to need to think about that, or that's a really great question. What do you know, or why are you asking? Can really also give you some
Mm-hmm.
time there as you are trying not to show your
Yeah.
reaction. But it's not going to be perfect. I know a lot of families, when I talk to them, they say, like, when do I start? When do I start talking to my kids?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ideally, as early as possible. We want to be doing those things in the most, in those smaller, less tricky topics, so we,
Yep.
we want to start talking and modeling that in those developmental ages. It will certainly look different when we're talking about consent or when we're talking about changes in the body, or how to take care of our body. So, um, when you're very, very young, some of the great things to be talking about are, your actual body parts.
Yeah.
We have a nose and we have an elbow, but for some reason, vulva feels very scary. We can say that we have eyes and an ear, but saying
Yeah.
penis or anus is very unnerving to us.
Yeah.
But starting small with some of those kinds of conversations really help also for us to build our own confidence, so that we can start talking about those trickier conversations. I think as parents, feel pretty comfortable talking to our kids about friendship, or we talk about appropriate touch.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not doing not friendly touching, like slapping, hitting, on the playground, we don't want to do that. We
Yeah.
have such confidence to be able to talk about that, and that's when we start modeling, consent, or it's when we start modeling boundaries. And it does look very different in some of the younger ages than it does when they're in puberty, for sure.
For
And
sure. Yeah.
that's where I would just love for families to know, if you have children now that are already in puberty, it's also not too late. So just know it's not too
Yes.
late. You've probably had conversations about other tricky topics. And that is what has opened the door and started to lay the groundwork. So there are
Yeah.
still ways of saying, I know I haven't talked to you about this before, um, but this is something that I want you to know you can always come and talk to me about. You know, if we don't need to talk about this right now, but I'm going to leave some books, I'm going to leave some resources. And I do want to check back in with you in a little bit. And I just thank you for bearing with me, because this was kind of uncomfortable. I didn't have someone come and talk to me about this. So I'm going to model that. I'm going to model that vulnerability. I'm going to model that openness, and making sure that it's open-ended and coming back to check back in again. And I think that there is something really lovely about doing it then too.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there's so much to cover. The gradual part of it is such a forgiving framework. I think this idea that we get to, it's for one, it's never too late to begin the conversation, but also doesn't have to happen on all one shot. And I think that was by and large many of our experiences, where there was a grade level where it was the 1 month thing in the curriculum, and we had to quickly cover it all and know what questions to ask. And that, I mean, it's such a weird setup. And then at home, I think it got modeled that way too. It's like, oh, when it had to come up, then we quick have the dialogue, and then we just let you figure it out after that, right? It wasn't this ongoing slow, like you talk about anything else. And so for us to try and reshape that, many of us are probably just learning this when our kids are 8, 9, 10, 11, and going, man, I get now why it's so important, but they're already that age. Like, I'm not starting at like 3, 4. I may have called their body parts playful names instead of their actual anatomically correct names. And I may have, and how do I undo or redo, or right? And I think when we phrase it as it can be gradual, it also gives us permission to revisit, for us to say, you know what, I just learned about, and you know, when I used to teach you those, I now understand that, right? And why that could be harmful, or what I'd like to do differently now is, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that one is, we go to what we know when we're taken aback or we're shocked into answering something. We go with our instinct of what we've been handed, right? And if we're slower about it, there's so much more room to be planful, to hesitate, to be able to say, that's a tough one, or I'm having a reaction. Let's come back to this. I'm going to give it some thought. Or I actually don't know anything about that. I wasn't taught that. I'm going to go look it up. And here are some good sources to find that information. And do you want to do that, or do I want to do that? You know, or do we do it together? And that way of talking can start anytime.
Anytime, right? And on any topic, really.
Anytime and on any topic. Yeah.
So if this is tricky, and you know, you're sitting and listening to this, and you're like, I don't even know how I would even get the words out to start a sentence, even if I practiced. It's really, I think, thinking about, how would you like to talk about this topic? And maybe we can find a different topic to start practicing, because it really is just practice. You can always come back. And even if there's rarely any harm in how you're going to say these things when you're approaching it from like I keep saying curious, but a curious and honest place. Giving people permission to learn and grow about this as adults in the same way that their children are. I know for myself, Karen, like I can reflect on a lot of my friends who are now having kids and who are asking these questions and saying, you know, the birds and the bees talk the one time, if they even got it, they were like, I don't think I knew nearly as much as I even could have. Yes, you learn some stuff in school. I didn't really learn about reproduction, or really learn about myself until I wanted to conceive, or I wanted to have a family. I didn't know that was a whole, you know, topic, or a whole venue that I didn't know about. And sexuality is so all encompassing. You know, when it touches on your identity, it does touch on your well-being, it does touch on reproduction, or just your biological being. There are so many facets, which is why we're doing multiple part series in this, because there's so much to talk about that I would be amiss to just, you know, give a quick list, so to speak, of if you do these things, it's going to work. What works really well is just coming alongside each other and exploring something in a safe, in a safe way.
Safe way.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
I also think it's a myth that it has to always be us. It's
Oh, that's
great if we
yeah.
are part of it, right? Of the team.
Yeah.
But I know like safe aunties and uncles that could have those
Mhm.
conversations or help have those conversations based on what our kids might be currently more comfortable with, or just wanting to know that we are okay if they trust other people
Yes.
to name
Yes.
that community, right?
Yes.
It can be
And
broader than us. Yeah.
yeah. And what does an askable adult look like? So that's also a great
Yes.
conversation to have with kids. If at any point ever about your safety or something is not
Yeah.
going well, there are lots of askable adults. And how do we identify those people in our lives? So even
Nice.
those are some of those great younger questions when you're sitting around the dinner table and you're chatting about like who else could you talk to? Who and being curious again, where would you go and who would you talk to?
Yeah.
So that you can have just an idea of if your child does feel like they have support and they have those askable adults. Askable
Mhm.
adults are the kinds of people that care about your child, that are open and honest with you too about the conversations that you're
Yeah.
having, and that probably will come to you and lean in and learn
Mhm.
together with you. You're not alone
Right.
as a parent. Your
Yeah.
friends are probably worried about talking to their children too.
That's right. Yeah.
There may be times where you want to seek out, even someone like myself. We run, from time to time at community centers, we will run parent classes on how to do this so that you can practice having these conversations with
Mhm.
other parents who are also worried about how they're going to have these conversations.
Yeah.
um, there are teachers, there are counselors, there are lots of
Yeah.
people, medical professionals. There are lots of people that we want our children to feel safe, disclosing and having these conversations with. So maybe it's starting with, what is an askable adult, and who do you
Yeah.
trust? What does that look
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. Oh, that's
Hmm.
amazing framework. The rehearsal piece is so important. Because I
So
think I
important.
rehearse in my head. Like I do. There's another version of rehearsal. Like I could say it out loud. I do find myself if I have the parent instinct of like, okay, this is something we need to have a discussion about, or I want to talk with her about, or I spend a good day or two rehearsing in my head about how would that sound? Would she be receptive to that? And what's my first statement going to be? And because once I get in there, I'm okay, right? But it's
Yes,
how do I not set this up to feel like we're having a talk, but
because they'll
also that she's
know.
prepared to know. Yeah, because they'll know. That's
They'll
right.
know.
They'll know. I know as I
Yeah,
sweat through my sweater and I
yeah. And
totally.
Karen, we touch on this on there's so many topics that we touch on this on, but there is so
Yeah.
much diversity, and children, not all children are ready at the same time. So even if you are ready to have this conversation, there
Hmm.
is a possibility that your child is like, no, thank you. This
Not
is
there.
not, I'm not at that point. And
Yeah.
so making sure even for yourself that if you go into this and you have, talked in the mirror, you have spoken out loud, or you have your notes on a cue card, or you're ready, you've done it. And then you get in there and they're like, actually, I already know that. No, thanks. That
Yeah.
you yourself are going to know where you're going to go from there, because it is
Right.
really hard you can't script these conversations. We
No, you
talk about
can't
that too.
script them.
You cannot script what will come out of them. You
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Yeah. So the
Not all
rehearsal
kids
is
are.
more about getting us comfortable
Yeah.
with just talking about it with them,
Hmm.
right? And then being willing to be confident enough to let them take the lead to where
Yeah.
that flow is going to go.
Yeah.
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 Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. So could you name for us some big hitter framework boundaries? Like, what are the things we should be thinking about
Hmm.
in terms
Hmm.
of the hows to have, like, what are the biggest things we can do?
Yeah. The biggest things, I touched on this earlier, but is please teach correct names for body parts.
Okay. Correct names for body parts. Okay.
Yeah. At, practice saying vulva, practice saying penis,
Yeah.
practice saying anus, practice using those.
Yeah.
When kids are young, it keeps them safe. It keeps them safe, and it provides
Yeah.
them with the language so that if something is going on for them, they will be able to use the correct words so that you
Yep.
can determine what's happening. So at the very bare minimum, as cutesy as it is, it's really important to teach correct body parts.
Yeah.
Keeps them safe.
Hmm.
I think it's also really important that we prepare kids for puberty and for physical changes. So it can be quite unnerving and scary if puberty is already happening. And so
Yeah.
I have heard this even through some of my own friends and through their experiences, because I'm blessed that they feel comfortable to talk to me about what that was like for them. And if you don't know what a wet dream is, if you don't know to expect menstruation, if you don't know that your body is going to, even if it's body odor or if it's body hair,
Yeah.
those are some of the more benign kind of changes that happen that we think maybe are obvious, that still are of so much value to have those conversations with our kids.
Yeah.
If it's talking about a stick of deodorant, like your body's changing, you might have noticed that some of your friends are starting to wear deodorant, or things are happening at gym class, and I just wanted to see how you feel about it. Do you have any questions? Um, those kinds of conversations go a really long way in preparing children to know that change is coming, to get the
Yeah.
information so they feel secure, and so that it is not a shameful experience, which
Hmm.
it really can be at times. And so that would be a big takeaway. Um, and then we've talked about this too, but if you are if you are caught off guard in these conversations, is really staying calm. Don't freak out.
Yeah.
The It feels like things are on fire and you want to run away. I know. I know. But even first responders don't run into a situation. So just take a deep breath and try
Yeah.
to the best of your ability to stay calm, and to model openness, so that they know that the question they're asking, it's okay to ask.
Yeah.
Would be one of them.
Okay.
That really helps to limit. It really helps to limit shame. Um,
Hmm.
Other big takeaways, I think, when you don't know, you don't know. We touched on this. Just be
Yeah.
honest. We don't know everything, and it is ever evolving. This is a very large topic. It has a lot of parts to it. As we learn and grow, as not just as a community but as a society, and we learn new ways to talk about these things, we're going to have to find new ways to talk to our children and to help them to navigate that, so we can find resources together. um,
Yeah.
it builds a lot of trust when you're able to come together and have a learning opportunity. So um, just know that it's really okay to know everything.
Yeah.
Um, and we even touched on this one too, Karen, just to talk to other caring adults that your child may ask questions to. You're not alone, but you also do want to know how to support one another, how to learn from one another,
Yeah.
and to make sure that you're on the same page, because you know your family best, you know your family's values
Yeah.
best, and you
Yeah.
know how you would like to pass this information, how it would like to land. You
Yeah.
know what kind of experiences you are hoping for your child to have. So if you have other caring adults, just not being shy or not being nervous to come alongside them,
Hmm.
and to speak really clearly with them about what that's going to look like. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
As an extension to that last one,
Mm-hmm.
I also think about the traditional kind of expectation that if you have boys, dad's having the conversation.
Mm.
If you have girls, mom's doing it. Or
Mm-hmm.
it all falls on mom. That's another
Yeah.
classic of that's your job to teach the kids about this. So
Yeah.
when you extend that of like who are the askable adults, I also just think close to home,
Yeah.
should we not involve both parents?
100%.
Yeah.
And I'll also, I'll take a moment to acknowledge that all families look different. All
Yeah,
families
that's
come in
right.
all shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
So, you might have two parents, you might only have one parent, you might have a really
Yeah.
loving grandparent. But I do think that there is something to be said about touching a little bit on the gender aspect, because we do need to teach our children about how sexual health impacts all bodies. We need to know about
Yes.
all bodies and what that's going to look like, because it also helps us to be more inclusive of one another and to understand the experiences that our peers may be going through as well.
Yeah.
And that helps to reduce shame at a time where it's really, really tricky for kids navigating how they fit. So there is that portion. I often think about my own experience, and I had both parents very active in having these conversations with me. And I remember thinking, well, this is awkward. Like, this is kind of awkward. And I could tell that he was thinking that it was kind of awkward. He's got 3 daughters. He can't really skirt around this. He's going to have to do it at some point.
Yeah.
But I do think back fondly of just, it was really helpful to know that I could go to both of my parents, and that both of them had different strengths as well. Who I might talk to about a relationship or a dynamic with my friends, or it might be different than who I want to go talk to about, I need a new bra, or I need, menstruation products, or it is a little bit unique too, in that, because often, and I don't want to just, stereotype, but often, because moms are the ones that are taking care of taking care of all bodies. Sometimes it does even default to them to talk about, say, hygiene or to body parts, or because they are more often in those situations during bath time, or, changing, or those kinds of situations, body care. And oftentimes are things that I'm making a concerted effort to also talk to my friends who are dads and saying to them, how does it feel for you? And sometimes they feel that that's not their role, that their partner does a really fantastic job of doing that. She's been in that position of care while they're quite young. And it just kind of continues to go without a discussion between the two of saying, how could I help? During bath time, could I have these conversations too? Sometimes we're not even clear with our partners about how we're going to talk about this. So there are some things I think to be aware of in that situation. And as children get older, they do want to identify with someone that does look like them. So there is a lot of value to have those conversations with, cisgender, for sure. But, my dad did a great job. He did, honestly. He tried to do what he could do with the information that he had. And to this day, I really, as an adult, feel very grateful to have had that kind of experience, and knowing that I can come to him with just a lot of questions. He's still there to support me in all those ways. But yeah, I would really encourage parents that are listening to just touch on that, have a conversation with the people that are in your family, to the people who could help you with this, and just kind of get clear on what you feel comfortable. Who feels comfortable talking about what? Is it something that you do together? Is it something that you're going to tag team on? Is it something that you want to bring in someone else to talk about? But yeah, it's just really, it's an important consideration, I think.
Beautiful. Okay, we're going to wrap this one up here, because I already am tempted to ask you questions that are going to bleed into the next one. So I'm going to cut myself off, and we're going to wait for episode 2. Okay. I'll see you there.
Sounds good.